Just welcome to everybody and thanks so much for joining us this evening. We're here to take a look at Irish third level colleges, the state of equality in these institutions, and going to look at what changes need to be made in terms of equality. Just FYI, this session will be recorded from here on out. I'm Mary. I'm the Engagement Manager with Stand, which is a not-for-profit that engages students across Ireland on justice and equality issues. I'm going to kick things off with a short introduction to the topic. We've got a lot to cover over the next hour or so I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. This slide is from the 2016 census, and what we're seeing here is a graph of 20-year-old students in Ireland and what their parents do for a living. You'll see that nearly 50% of parents or guardians in all households are employers, managers, and non-manual workers. And what we also see is that less than 5% of households are agricultural workers or so-called unskilled labourers. The next slide shows people who have achieved PhDs and whereabouts in Ireland they're located. It unfortunately won't come as much of a surprise to see that over 20% of PhD holders reside in Dublin. What's more unsettling though is that nearly 13% of the total number of all PhD holders, and that's not just Dublin, that's 13% extra on top of Dublin, come from the Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown area of Dublin, which, if you're not familiar with it, has some of the most affluent areas in Dublin. And that brings us to 2020. At the moment, we're seeing students across Ireland being unable to fulfil their academic potential due to being locked down in environments that aren't conducive to work. This year has also seen massive increases in on-campus accommodation costs, as well as general rent increases that make it virtually impossible to live outside of the home and attend college. When it is the case that students are renting, they're working crazy hours in addition to attending college to fund everything. We're also seeing students commuting crazy distances as a result of not being able to rent close to college. On top of all of that, student fees have increased 275% since 2008. There's inadequate financial support being made available. Large chunks of institutions are still inaccessible to those with disabilities, and you can look at that in terms of both physical and learning disabilities. And last but not least, people living in direct provision who want nothing more than to assimilate into Irish society are being made wait 3 years to gain access to third level education. So we're going to spend the next 45 minutes covering the following topics. We'll have about 20 minutes at the end for questions from the audience, and we should wrap up around 8:10, all going according to plan. Just as an FYI for panelists, the question will appear on screen like so, and will show how long you have to discuss a topic. You'll also be notified on screen when there is 1 minute left to speak. So please keep an eye on that so we can keep things moving. Everyone, please feel free to put your questions into the chat box throughout the discussion. I'll collate the questions and send them on to our moderator for the Q&A session at the end. I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to have the following panelists lined up for you this evening. Our moderator is Megan Riley, USI Vice President for Equality and Citizenship. Are you there, Megan?
Yes, hello.
Hi, thanks. Next up on the panel, we have Leighton Gray, UCD SU's LGBTQ+ campaign coordinator. Are you there, Leighton?
I am. Hi, guys.
Thanks, Leighton. And next up, we have Hannah Eniola Odunjo, student ambassador at University College Cork. Are you there, Hannah?
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
Super, thanks, Hannah. And next we have Tanya Foster, Welfare and Equality Officer at IT Carlow SU. Are you there, Tanya?
Yeah, hi, how are you, everyone?
Lovely, thanks, Tanya. And next we have Rory Weiner, Cultural Affairs and Irish Language Officer at Maynooth University. Are you there, Rory?
Yeah, hello, everyone.
And last but not least, we have Luke Daly from TU Dublin Blanchardstown as the Deputy President. Are you there, Luke?
I am. Hey, all.
Thanks, Luke. So we'll kick off and I'll hand over to Megan. Thanks, Megan.
No worries. Thanks so much, Mary, and for the introduction as well and kind of setting the scene. Really excited to host this discussion over the next 45 minutes or so, and I think we have a true panel of experts here, the students themselves and student officers, so you can probably see there in front of you, but the first question, we're starting with a basic one, so it's what does equality mean to you? And I'm going to start off with the way I have the names in front of me, so Leighton, if you want to go first.
Sure. I suppose equality in this context would mean that everyone has an equal chance and the same chance to access third level education and a good quality of third level education. So no matter who you are, what you look like, or what your financial circumstances are. And this question also gives me a bit of like feeling because it's actually really complicated when we go into it. But on this context and in a 1 minute scale, that is what I would mean when talking about it.
Great. Thanks so much, Leighton. Hannah, on to you.
I don't think I have much to add on. I would say the same thing. So equal opportunities and equal chances for everybody, regardless of anything really, financial costs, what you look like, what you believe, where you come from. Yeah, equal opportunities for everybody.
Fantastic. And Tanya, if you want to go next.
Yep, so I think what everyone has really said around like equality, it's definitely everyone having the same opportunity. I think too that like, in terms of like in the financial aspect of things, people having the same ability to access things than anyone else. So if it be equipment for their studies or books or whatever, that they are able to have that access in third level education. So it's just not the basics, it's everything that goes on around it as well.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Rory?
Yeah, I suppose to me, equality also means like feeling really welcomed and like you're validated and wanted and seen in your institution, as in, you're recognized, you have your own experiences and background that you bring to the table, and that's really valued as well. And it's like, hello, yes, you're just as wanted as everyone else. Come take a seat at this table and use your voice, and I'll listen to you and see you for who you are.
Great. I think that's a really important point. Thanks so much. And then last but not least, we have Luke.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I suppose for me, equality doesn't really mean treating everyone the same. I think for me, it means treating people differently so that we can achieve kind of the same result or outcome for everyone. I don't think equality should be viewed as an end result, but I think what it means kind of more so is that it should be a mechanism or kind of like a vehicle to kind of move in a way that's like for the intended person to get to the end goal. So that's what it means to me.
Great, thanks so much. I think that gives us a really nice broad overview, and I suppose it sort of sets the scene for what we're here to talk about in terms of colleges. And I always think people need to see equality as more of a fundamental part of education than we already do. So yeah, thanks for all those thoughts, really interesting. We will move on to the next question, which is how do you measure equality and its progress? And how do you think Irish campuses are performing on that front? So our participants have a little bit more time to answer this one. And I'm actually going to go in reverse order. So Luke, we're going straight back to you if you want to come in on that.
Okay. Okay, so basically, are people still being discriminated against? Obviously, yes, then we're not equal. I suppose measuring equality is like measuring social interactions. It's really, really hard to measure perceptions or attitudes towards people or a group of people. However, what can be measured is the likes of legislative, service-based, or kind of like just general supports available to whichever group of people are looking to access them, and then using these to allow for social change. I think it's very much a top-down approach, and I suppose our main question should be to the change makers, why? I suppose we've seen with COVID-19 that the government, obviously in this country, whichever party may be in power after this, does have extraordinary powers and the ability to enact like huge change overnight. So I think when this ends, a big conversation around equality legislation will have to be had, as well as like other supports with government, with ministers, with public sector workers. And yeah, so I think it's possible to measure it, but the challenging part is changing and challenging perceptions.
Great. And then do you want to come in on a comment about how you think our Irish campuses are performing?
Yeah, sure. I think I don't want to be that mean person, but look, I think I think Irish colleges could be doing a little bit better. I think I don't think that the campuses are doing much on it. However, I think that the students and the stakeholders in the campuses are what are really driving it. Because if campuses were really driving equality or equity as a changing force, we wouldn't be seeing students fighting 4 and 5 years for gender neutral toilets, or God forbid, longer for a gender identity policy, or stuff like that. So I think Irish campuses could be doing a little bit better, but I definitely think that the students in those and the stakeholders in those are the drive and change for that. They're doing great.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I agree. Sorry, I kind of put you on the spot there, but I think your point about the government as well is really interesting. There are things we've been campaigning for years. Look, all of a sudden we have a rent freeze, and we have they're moving people out of direct provision temporarily, at least. It just shows in a crisis that things can be done. Brilliant. Okay, so we're moving up the list. So Rory, if you want to tackle those 2 questions. Is Rory there? He might be on mute.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
We can. Go ahead.
Yeah, so everything Luke said there about the policy stuff, but then there's also the kind of the inclusion side as well, and I think one important way to kind of measure progress on equality is to look at what inclusion are you seeing actually in college life and student life. While you might have like a certain percentage of your students from a certain background, are those students actually seen participating in society, student union, co-curricular, all that, all those opportunities that people talk about at college and that sort of thing? And are they also the students representing their college and that sort of thing? So is there like full participation? Maybe they have a place in college, maybe they're going to their lectures and going home, but are they really part of the college community as well? And do they feel welcomed into that college community? So that's one way to measure it, I think.
Absolutely. And then how do you think colleges are doing themselves around those pieces you mentioned?
I don't really think they do a whole lot, to be honest. And in my experience of like college authorities around equality, they're not as interested in the students as well. They're looking at, promotions to professorships and that sort of thing, which is really, really important. But they seem to think that, oh, the pipeline's fine. I mean, there is equality now in people coming into colleges, but I don't think it's really true. I think maybe they've a certain number of places going to socioeconomically disadvantaged students, whatever it is, but I think there's a problem still with inclusion, and they don't look at it. I think they're really focused on the top down and not the bottom up, which like the policy stuff is important, but they need to think about it really qualitatively as well, like what kind of actual experience are students and staff having within that campus environment, and do they really feel included and welcomed?
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Tanya, do you want to go next?
Yep. So I think a good measurement for equality is looking at like statistics. At in the first couple of slides, we talked about people with like PhDs and Dublin area versus more or less social economic areas. And I think if we're able to track that and over the years see a change, then we can say, yeah, we've done more to help make it more equal for people from lower social economic backgrounds to be able to attain higher level education. I think also within the Institute as well, you can look at like how many people are accessing a service. So something like the Student Assistance Fund, are we using up the full Student Assistance Fund? Is that something that students are using? And if that's the case, that means that there are more people who would come from lower social economic backgrounds who are gaining education, who are getting support from the Institute in that level. I think our college IT Carlow, we have been putting steps in place to make the college more equal. So for instance, we have the Athena Swan project, which I know is very much staff led, but it is about creating a gender balance within the organization. And as a part of that, we've developed, now it's still in draft right now, a trans identity policy, and that has helped contribute to like gender neutral toilets. There's also been more money for SAF and things like that. So I think on that front, we're doing well. I do think we do need to do more, and it's not something that, you know, even if we track and we measure what we're doing, that we're going to be perfect. Like there's still more that we need to do. And I really love what Luke said in the last question around like, you know, it's a different approach for each person. Like each group of people need to be helped in a different way. And we can't have a one size fits all approach when we're measuring equality. It needs to be very individualized, and it needs to be very like unique to each person's situation. So yeah, that's kind of what I think in terms of measuring and how Irish campuses are performing. I do think though Irish campuses have a harder time performing on an individual level. Like I know in my work, I'd be dealing with very specific casework, and when it comes to like specific cases, I think we have a harder time with like figuring out how do we handle that. So that's something I think we can improve on as well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think with casework, you're often seeing the people who fall through the cracks and those who have kind of the system has left behind. Thanks so much, Tanya and Hannah.
Yeah, so I think measuring equality in Irish universities would be quite difficult. I think one way would be to speak to people from these backgrounds themselves, from these minority groups, and hear what they're saying back, you know, surveys, questionnaires. Are they seeing any improvements from when they started in first year to when they're in their final year? I think signals as well that we could look at are inclusivity, representation, is there visible diversity? There's social statistics as well, like the PhD graph, things like that. But like with what Rory said, are you seeing inclusivity? Are you seeing representation? Like when you go into campuses, when you go to club training sessions, when you go to the society meetings, are you seeing people from these minority backgrounds? Are you seeing students with disabilities participating? Are you seeing students who are part of the LGBTQ community participating? Or are you only seeing them in lecture rooms and then they're going home? So I think one way that would be maybe one of the most easiest ways or direct ways of measuring would be going out there with surveys and questionnaires and speaking to the students in these campuses, finding out their opinion, their perspective, what it's like for them. Are they part of the university, or are they just a student and they go home? Yeah, as in regards to how I think Irish campuses are performing, I think they have a very backseat approach. So there may be one forum or one committee, and they hold their meetings, and then that's about it. You don't see the work they're doing, you don't hear the work they're doing. I'm sure many students don't even know that the university has a minority forum or committee. So I think their approach isn't that full on. In individual universities or campuses, you may be able to see certain changes. For example, I know in my university, a lot of the bathrooms in the older buildings have been converted to gender neutral, and in all our new buildings, they're all gender neutral. So there's little things here and there that you can see, okay, they're listening, but on a larger scale, not so much.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Hannah. Some really interesting points there. And then just to wrap up this question, Leighton, do you want to come in on any of those points raised?
Sure. Sorry, I won't try to be too long. I obviously can only speak from a UCD perspective. I know that UCD, I feel like, tries to measure equality through the panels and boards and committees and positions it has, which I think is a bit detrimental because it's there and they can say it's there, but it can be just left, or it can be left to minorities to deal with it. Like, I am the LGBTQ plus campaign coordinator for UCDSU. I often do things on my own, or else the welfare officer will help me. But that's very limited. I sit on equality, diversity and inclusion, LGBT in UCD, and the people there are just so out of touch. They're more focused on getting international students in and actually focusing on the issues that there are on campus. So I think we have to be really careful, at least from UCD perspective, when we're measuring equality, because it seems to be, okay, we have this person, and this board, but if it's just there to say it's there, then it's really just tokenistic more so than anything else. So I don't think Irish campuses are the best at performing right now. It seems to be a lot of saving face rather than actual action.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the consensus seems to be that there's a lot of work left to do. So we'll move on to the next question, which is what sort of barriers to equality are currently in place? And if you want to take a particular focus on the COVID-19 situation, what groups of students are being affected, and just how do you kind of see that playing out? So we're going to switch the order around again, and I'm going to start with Hannah this time.
So I'm going to speak from an ethnic minority background and a disadvantaged socioeconomic background. I think, for example, the majority of universities have said that summer exams are going to be online, but what they may not consider, maybe they have considered, but what can they do, is maybe not all households have a computer or a laptop, or maybe they only have one. You don't know the size of these families. Even if you take the standard 4-bedroom semi-detached house, you don't know the size of this family, and a lot of ethnic minority families would have larger families. So let's say like 6 people in a family, let's say maybe, or 7 people, 5 kids in a family. Finding a quiet room where you can study, or even be able to listen to your online lectures like with peace, is quite difficult. So they're already at a disadvantage. And I know they have said, or at least for my university, that if you're unhappy with your results, you can resit, but then you're in the same situation and you have to study again to resit. So there is definitely a disadvantage there, which is my point. But I think there are a lot of factors that are going to negatively impact a lot of people in this group. You don't know if maybe being away from home to attend university was an escape for some of these students. You don't know if they're coming from a family where they have to have a very involved approach in the upbringing of the children, or the caring of the family. If they're females, they may have to do the cooking, like the cleaning. So then that's already time taken away from the time that they would use to study. So I do not think having summer exams online or the online assessments may be the best. There are a lot of factors that will definitely put people behind.
Yeah, I think that raises some really interesting points as well about the current situation we find ourselves in, which maybe people haven't thought about before, and we have to take into account the different circumstances people are in. So thanks for that, Hannah. Leighton, do you want to come in on that?
Sure. I suppose, like, I'm sitting in Cavan, and the internet in rural areas isn't always great. So there's a lot of people who've had to go home, and they don't really have access to a lot of the documents that the lecturers are putting online. And then there's people going home who are carers, or people in their family who are sick that they have to look after. From an LGBT perspective, there's people who are now stuck in homophobic and transphobic households and they can't go anywhere, which is really detrimental to mental health. And then even anyone who struggles with mental health in general, like I know I'm finding this really difficult, and universities just don't really seem to know how to respond. So it's a lot of meetings and backgrounds that we're being told about, but it seems like, you know, people burying their heads in the sand. And I think unfortunately this is like a continuation of a pattern that universities sometimes take. It's just kind of like, yeah, we're doing stuff in the background and our students have been flung all over the world and are in completely different situations, but we're just going to try and not think about it, which is a shame because some people are in much more difficult situations now than they would have been if COVID hadn't happened. And it's really going to impact on a lot of people's grades and GPA. And obviously then, of course, you have the student nurses who are working unpaid and losing jobs and places to live, and some of them are being paid now, but it seems to be a bit all over the place. But it seems to be more students' unions and grassroots groups who are fighting for equality of all these different people rather than the universities themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose that's why we're there to agitate when they won't do their jobs properly. Luke?
Mic's off.
He might be
Sorry.
on mute. Is he on mute?
Yeah,
There
I'm
you go.
back. Yeah, I think a huge barrier is marketing of minority groups across the board, and how we're constantly marketed as a hassle to the public and a hassle to the government. And then when it comes to boardroom meetings, we're really important when it's looking good on, for an example, I know, Athena Swan, or if there's an equality award going, then of course we're the most important people in the room, and the higher up people will tell us how we should act and feel, and etc., etc. So I think marketability is a huge issue that's facing us. Then, sorry, I have my little points written down here. And then from kind of even a college perspective, touching on points that previous speakers made, really strong points as well. From a financial or even accessibility side of things, you know, people are told that they're second-rate citizens, basically, that we will face the issues and deal with the issues that the majority have, and they'll be looked at first, and then we'll kind of piece together and go, as you know, do what we can for anyone else. You know, that's not fair, because that raises yet another issue or a barrier that we face, that kind of the majority or the kind of people with higher authority tend to try and pitch kind of minority groups against each other, and it becomes almost a contest for, I need this more, I need these rights more, I need these supports more than the other person, when, you know, the colleges have endless amounts of resources to design a system with everybody in mind. And, you know, where's the marketability now? Where people were singing inside in boardroom meetings saying, oh my God, the accessibility here, when, you know, there's students across the country who can't access learning materials. Because they have accessibility requirements, and the college is basically forcing them to fail. You know, if they really cared about marketability and, you know, they were doing it for the right thing, these supports would be put in place. And then, you know, I kind of think as well, even when it comes to like the grassroots stuff, I think a lot of people are exhausted because there's just so many issues that have to be kept on fighting and fighting and fighting. So I know a couple of years ago, when I was the chairperson of the LGBT Society, I floated the idea of having kind of like almost like a regional thing where, I don't know, like, let's say, what's the most important thing in Dublin at the moment? It could be trans healthcare. What's the most topical issue, and why don't we all pull together? And then also support each other's campaigns as well, because there's an awful lot of intersectionality among these minority groups as well, and we're all kind of fighting for a better cause, really. So I think those are a couple of the barriers.
Yeah, great, thanks. I was nodding along vigorously with you there. Rory, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, sure. So what other barriers that haven't been covered? I mean, say in Maynooth, where I study, I think it's 60% of students are commuters, so they're like spread out all around the country and kind of were, I suppose, reliant on, like, they were already living at home, but now they've been cut off from college entirely and they're not able to get into college to study. And I mean, I suppose it affects not just commuters as well, but yeah, like the same kind of points, like you're expected to complete your degree, but you've been cut off from, even like so many students used to borrow a laptop in the library to do their essays on, and probably, I guess, don't have a laptop or a decent laptop at home. They can't afford to buy one for college, and they don't have access to their books anymore. And I mean, even like accessing online resources, I don't know about in other universities, but we get logged out after 30 minutes if you're like accessing online materials. So then you have to log back in to the server or whatever. And I think like just a lot of like academic databases and stuff don't work great when you're not on campus. It's really helpful to actually be on campus in the library or whatever it is. So it's really hard to actually get your academic work done when you're cut off, and especially if you don't own a laptop or can't buy books. If you can afford to buy the books, that helps. But a lot of people were reliant on borrowing the books from the library if they couldn't afford to buy them themselves, depending on what course they were in. So there's just a lot of little stuff like that pops up, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for that. And then
Yep. So just quickly, like what sort of barriers are currently in place? I'm going to kind of go on like a non-COVID kind of tangent a bit, just because I kind of prepared this before COVID-19. But kind of, I think the main barrier for students, especially if they're from lower social economic backgrounds, is not knowing what supports are available. So not knowing about the SAF. I know last year as a student, I was not aware about the Student Assistance Fund. I didn't know that there was an emergency welfare fund in my students' union. And so I think that's the first main barrier that is put into place for students. Also in terms of like mental health and ethnic minority groups and LGBT, people aren't aware of what services are available within the college. They're not aware of the clubs and societies. They're not aware of the counselors on campus or the nurse on campus and services that you can use on campus or off campus. And so I think that's a main barrier, and that might prevent people from getting as far as they wanted to go. And then I think just with this COVID-19 situation, I think it just is amplified even more. Like I know that there are people who are working, for instance, and so they can't put as much focus on their studies because they're working essential jobs, or even just the stress of it all. Like if their family members have lost their jobs, or they're losing their accommodation because they're a student, or they were living in digs or whatever. I think it's just amplifying that kind of situation. And yeah, it's a really terrible situation all around, but I think there are these barriers in place no matter what situation. So even if it's a typical college year, there are still these barriers in place.
yeah, absolutely. And definitely on the information point as well. It's good to discuss that as well. So thanks very much for that, and we'll move on to the next question. So this is, what do you practice in your own institutions when it comes to equality, and how can students, and if you want to talk about, I know a lot of you are involved in students' unions, play a role in shaping the equality culture of the institution. So I know we've talked a little bit maybe about things that aren't working, but maybe you want to talk about experiences that you've had of things that are working, and the pivotal role that students will play in all of that, and that they do. So we will go to Rory first, if that's okay.
Okay. Cool. So what does work, or what do we do? One thing that I like in Maynooth, in our students' union at least, is that we've kind of a senate that decides the policy of our union, and we have dedicated senator roles for key interest groups and minorities. So we have a HERE senator, a DARE senator, an ethnic diversity senator, gender equality. So it means there's like a platform for an activist from those various groups or movements to be discussing our policy all the time, and our policy making body, it's not just made up of class reps, it's essentially made up of activists from various interest groups. So at all of our senates, the main things coming up are the things that these groups are concerned with. So all the time, issues of equality are being brought up at our meetings. So I think having those roles, I don't think it's tokenistic. I think it's a really good starting point. And I think once other students see that, oh, that's what the student senior is doing, they're tackling peer issues, they have an ethnic diversity senator, students then will see, oh, this is what they do then. So they are concerned with my issue or my interest group. So maybe it's an institution or maybe it's a group I can get involved with. Maybe a students union is for me, and I should get involved with what they're doing as well, and lend my voice to it. So I think it's a good start to have like dedicated roles like that for equality issues. And one other thing then is I suppose what the universities themselves do. So I suppose every university has like officers and committees discussing equality and diversity issues, but sometimes it is like a room of really senior academics sitting around talking about it. And you hear them say things at the meetings, like if you're there representing the students union, they'll say things like, oh yeah, and you know, we care about LGBT issues, and there's like a great LGBT society. And I'm like the only student there, and I look around me, I'm like, why aren't they here? Like, if they're so great and you care so much about it, why didn't you invite their chairperson to this meeting? Like, I think that's something that institutions could do, is literally actually invite the diverse people to your meeting instead of just sitting around talking about them, saying, oh yeah, that's great, and who don't actually want to hear their voice. Like, if you really want insight, give them the opportunity to use their voice on your platform instead of speaking on their behalf or brainstorming about them without them even in the room. I think that's important.
Yeah, 100%. That representation and being at the table is absolutely crucial. Hannah, do you want to come in next?
Yeah. So in UCC we do have it's just called a minority forum, and then there is subsections. So there would be meetings for ethnic minorities, and then there would be meetings as well with members of the LGBTQ plus society, etc. And at these meetings, I suppose it would mainly be made up of students and then 2 academics from the university. And what they did do this year is they had a lecturer who was from a multicultural background to head it. And I suppose we all appreciated the idea, but at the same time, I think with these forums and committees, the universities are listening or trying to be perceived as listening, but there is still no action being done. I suppose as well, at the end of all our emails, they've started workshops. I don't know how to phrase this. They do host like a series of workshops on different things. They want to start an initiative for a badge with pronouns on it. There is a really large LGBTQ plus society or community in UCC, so I'm happy that the university seems to be listening to them. At the end of emails, you know, we sign off with our pronouns, which is small, but I think it is considerate as well. The bathrooms as well. I suppose in my institution there isn't that much. I'm really struggling for things to think of. In terms of accessibility for students with disabilities, we do have a lot of software, and there's special sections in the library with this software. All the buildings are wheelchair accessible, which I suppose is over the majority of the country, I'd like to think. I don't see much. I'm really struggling. I do not see much. I think a lot more could be done. In regards as to how students shape the equality and culture of the institution, I think that's a deeper rooted institution that's changing people and changing people's mindsets and their beliefs and attitudes, which I don't believe can just change immediately. In university, I think that would be a long-term process. And yeah, that's all. Sorry, I really
No, that's fine. There's some really great points there. Thank you so much for that, Hannah. Leighton?
Yeah, I suppose from a UCD viewpoint, UCD has had a really cool history of students leading grassroots organizations. So like Consent in UCD, Fix Our Education is a current group that's really prominent, and I ran UCD for Choice in the year of repeal. All of these were independent groups that we just started because we felt there was something wrong. And then they ended up being platformed by the SU, which is great. To the point where, you know, a lot of the times the university would start to listen or did listen or just be annoyed by us, but it depends. In terms of people playing a role, getting involved, I think sometimes in these grassroots organizations is really important. Or if you feel that there's something up and there's no group for you, start one. I think people are really surprised by how quickly these groups gain traction once you keep pushing them. And just annoy the university as much as you can. Like if they're doing something that is just immoral or is what you feel is against some level of equality, because the more you annoy them, the more likely they are to listen.
Annoy them as much as you can. I love it. Tanya, you want to go next?
Yep. So in terms of like practicing what I do to practice equality within our own organization, so I'd be the welfare and equality officer. So I work with college management. So we've got an equality, diversity, and inclusions department. So I'd be in good contact with them. Also, I work very closely. We've got a couple of lecturers who are really passionate about like LGBT issues, minority issues. And so I work with them on creating campaigns and doing like a joint student and staff campaign. So it's getting like more people on board. It's getting the staff on board with something, and then they in turn get the students on board. So for example, now obviously it didn't happen because of the coronavirus, but myself and this one lecturer who's really passionate about like trans rights, we came together to come up with a trans awareness day. So it was a student and staff trans awareness day. So he brought in like, you know, what would be good for the staff to know? What information should they know to help them be more trans inclusive and more trans aware? And then for someone like me, I'd bring in, okay, what should students know and how can students be engaged in this? So I think that is something that I've really practiced, is like that collaboration between the two of us. And I definitely think like for students, just again, like what Leighton was saying about like, just be annoying, like just come out and say that you need something, because that I think is really important. And the more that you push, the more likely it is to get done.
Definitely. And then Luke?
Yeah. So myself, I sit on the Diversity, Equality and Inclusions Committee, where I've done for the past 5 or 6 years now. As a welfare officer last year, I ran campaigns, engaged with the different societies on how we can best promote them as kind of like an ally to them, as opposed to, you know, speaking over and allowing them have not only the financial support but also the platform to be visible and be representative. Sorry. I think, however, we also have a lot of lecturers who do instill change and motivate students about being kind of their best global citizen as well. There's a couple of modules put on and stuff like that. However, there are a lot more that universities could be doing. I know Rory made a solid point about how colleges constantly praise the LGBT society, and that kind of ties back to the marketing point then that I made earlier about, oh my God, we have an amazing LGBT society. But I think what needs to be taken from that is again, that's the students who are doing that. While the college might allow them and mobilize them to do that, it's still the students carrying out that work. Um, like universities could be doing so much more in pushing for University of Sanctuary designation, supporting traveller access to third level education, reaching out to support students living in direct provision, supporting parents flying pride flags during Pride season. It's simple things that make a big impact. And I'm not saying that universities aren't doing this, but what I am saying is that they're not doing enough, and it shouldn't be our job to constantly nag at the university to do better, the college to do better. They should know better and they should act better, because they have very highly qualified professionals teaching modules and instilling knowledge into people about how to do better. So why should they have to be constantly told and told and told again? Is kind of, sorry, I went on a bit of a rant there.
That's what this is for. I think you named some really good examples as well of what colleges can actually do and should be doing as well. So thanks a million for that, Luke. We are now going to move on to the last question from me before we take questions from panelists. And we saved the juiciest one for last. And it's how can we move away from tokenism towards true representation? So obviously we see this a lot within colleges, that they've kind of started to become savvy to the equality agenda, for want of a better phrase, and that they then start to put people on committees and various different boards. But we would love to hear your take on how do we truly create equal campuses and equal society, broader than that as well, as opposed to just being tokenistic. So I'm going to start with Tanya this time. Sorry, I'm mixing up the running order like mad. Keep you on your toes.
I think it's important that, again, what we say is you're not just putting someone on a committee just to check a box. It's about actually understanding what a group of people need. And so this could be through doing surveys, this could be through having like discussion forums, having consultations. For example, I know when we're working on the gender expression policy, we worked with various trans organizations. We worked with the LGBT Society. Similar things for SAF have happened, where they consulted with the lifelong learning students. They consulted with mature students, so they decided on certain ring fences for the certain amount of funds that they're going to have for that. And that, I think, is a way to truly represent, as opposed to just, let's throw this person on a committee because they are an ethnic minority, they have a disability, and they're LGBT, and they're poor. Like, that's not really cool. Like, I do think that we actually need to continue having surveys and actually discussions, and do them for a reason, not just to collect data, but to actually inform yourself, okay, from this, we are going to change this. We are going to do this. That, I think, is really important, and that's how we can have true representation. And I do think a students' union has an important role in playing a part in making sure that we're being truly representative of our students. And that is, again, us being approachable enough to understand what our students need and to truly keep track of what our students are coming to us with. So, for example, for myself, I took casework statistics, obviously took out the identifying data, but I kind of had a spreadsheet with like accommodation issues, and I tracked the number of accommodation issues, or I tracked the number of SAF issues, or SUSI issues, or whatever issue came through my door. So I understood, okay, when I was going to management, these are the issues and this is the number of students that are coming to my door. Now, they do say the number of students that actually seek help compared to the number of students that need help are a small figure. So I do think we do need to take that into effect, but definitely that is important that we do put the calls out there. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tanya. Leighton, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I have a lot of feelings on this. So I suppose from an SE perspective, as Rory was saying, it's great that there's roles dedicated for minority groups, but they need to be done correctly. And in my experience, it has been very tokenistic in the sense that it's a box that has been ticked and it's there. like I'm the only trans person in the UCDSU. I obviously cannot speak for all trans people. I cannot speak for all gay people. I cannot speak for all queer people. And it can be very frustrating because minority people can be put in these positions and left to take up a lot of responsibility. Like I'm part-time and unpaid, and I've gone to every LGBT protest there can be. I've like organized events, I've done yada yada yada, and that's a lot for one person to take on, I think. And sometimes what can happen is that these positions are created, or people are put in committees or groups, and it is just to tick a box. So while it's great to have them, they need to be done correctly, because otherwise then you have minority groups going into SUs and colleges and institutions and having terrible experiences and then not wanting to go near it ever again, and then we lose a voice. And it's really critical that we have these voices. But I can totally understand why people don't want to go back, because it is difficult and it's demoralizing, and it's very hard to know you're somewhere just as a token. And then I suppose then you do have SUs and you do have institutions that will then take credit for all this work that minority people have done. And like UCD is very like, we're so open and we're so accepting, we have this and we have that, and we have the other. Our SUs might post something and it's really down to the work of a couple of people from a minority group, and that's where I worry about those positions, because they're great to have, but if they're not done properly, we're just tokens, and it's unfair to expect me as one queer person to represent how many thousands of queer people are in UCD. But at the same time, if we keep doing this to them, no one's going to come forward and add their voices.
Yeah, definitely. Some really interesting points, and also activist burnout is a real thing. So we all have to watch that, all of us involved. Luke, do you want to come in? You might be on mute.
Sorry, I did it again. Yeah, no, there's a couple of ways we can move off of tokenism into actual representation. I suppose that we have to recognize differences, appreciate culture, listen to people when they say something's not okay. If you are not particularly from a certain group, or if you don't have certain beliefs, or basically you have to take the person in that situation and view their experience as valid. You're not in a position to question it. There are endless possibilities to do this, and we need to listen twice as much as we speak. Just because somebody does have an opinion doesn't mean they have the right to impose their ideology on somebody who's trying to live their best life in that group. And I think I'm speaking as a queer person, not for all queer people, obviously, but we don't have to accept that. And you don't have to apologize for asking people to educate themselves as well. Kind of as a queer person, you hear it a lot that we constantly have to educate others, when it's not really our job to do that. It's not our job to be an educator. It's our job to be a supporter if people want to get educated and say, oh yeah, here's this, research that. Obviously, if you think it's in the best to be supportive, go for it. But I suppose as well, I think we kind of need to start relying and truly believe in the process over protest principle as well. If people don't listen, then you can get angry and call it out. You can get upset if someone wants to design a narrative that describes you as a stereotype, then you get to be the person who actively challenges that stereotype. You know, we can design policy and work with those who design policy who will actually listen to you. And, you know, I suppose we have to identify who our allies are that will enforce change, and call out or appropriately feed into calling out something that's not necessarily right. When it comes to something the university could do, for example, or that we can lobby the universities to do, is positive discrimination when hiring. So, for example, we're striving for Athena Swan at the moment, and I sit in DEI meetings and I'm hearing about how important it is to, you know, get more females in higher positions, and I'm kind of sitting there thinking to myself, okay, but the top 7 people, 6 of them are men. So why are we not hiring, you know, using positive discrimination when it's proven to increase the actual representation numbers? We shouldn't be hiring people just because they meet a certain criteria, but positive discrimination kind of works around that as well. But there's a lot we can do, and I think we need to start out by, if we're not necessarily from a certain group, listen to that group and actively include them and let them lead the conversation for an appropriate amount of it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Luke. Loads of points there. Rory?
Yeah. So I think I have to agree with what Leighton said, that it can leak into tokenism, and it can become really unfair when you put all the work and responsibility on kind of one representative. And I think what's a positive step that we have in Maynooth is that most of these roles are on the policy making body as opposed to the executive. Because when you're on the executive, it's up to you to do all the work. But what our senators do is they make the executive do the work. They decide what they want, and then instead of it being upon them to do the work, they can mandate the executive to do it and then hold them accountable. So ideally, and it's not always in practice, but ideally it puts the pressure and the onus on the executive rather than the person representing the minority group. So I think that's a good step if you give that kind of power to make it clear that no, it is the high up person's responsibility to do this. The representative is there to make sure that they do it rather than the representative doing all the work for the high up person. But I think that's hard to get right. But if you can put it in the structures that if you're representing here, then you're not doing the work. You're holding someone else accountable, and you're holding the higher person, your university or whoever it is, you're holding them accountable on behalf of whatever interest you're representing. But yeah, like that, it's so hard to just put it all on one person. I think a good way to move towards true representation is, like, first of all, there is inherent value in inclusivity and equality. It's just a fact that it speaks for itself, the value in it. So if every institution recognizes that this is a positive thing for us, that this is objectively beneficial for us to be more inclusive, and we can take advantage of it, and also it's something that something positive we can contribute to society. Actually, if our institution's really inclusive, then it can become part of the culture and part of the ambition of the university, that in the university's identity, one of the things we do is we have an inclusive community. We contribute to greater equality in society, to equality of education, so that the, top ranks of our society or participation in our society is more diverse and inclusive. Like that, if that is one of the goals of the institution, is to break down inequality, then you can really start moving away from tokenism. And like I said, there's inherent value in it. So there's no reason why it shouldn't be part of the aim of any university, should be to break down inequality, because it's advantageous. I think it's inherently advantageous to the university to do that, and to society as well. So I think that's something.
Yeah, absolutely. You're dead right. Thanks a million. And Hannah?
Yeah, so I think the key to moving away from tokenism towards true representation would be empowerment instead of representation. So be an ally and give a voice instead of being the lead and the voice, because you can't try to tackle an issue that you will never really fully understand or comprehend because you do not experience that issue. So it's, for example, the abortion laws in the US. I think there was only one female senator or one female who was like signing off on the bill. She didn't actually sign off, and then everybody else in the room was male, and that doesn't make sense, because how can they pass a law on females when it has nothing to do with them, really? I hope my example makes sense. But when you want to take an initiative or start an initiative to make a change, I think the people who are going to be affected by that change and who the change is supposed to be of benefit of should be the ones in the lead. Because do you really understand? You can't really understand what you're trying to change if it's not your problem. If it's not a problem you experience, I should say, sorry. So I think in inclusivity, as Rory said, and diversity on these panels, on these committees, in these groups is key, and having them as the lead as well. So in general, it would be the people with authority or with power who most of the times are not the ones affected by these issues, who have the power and the lead and who want to make the change, or who started these groups. But I think giving the power, being the support, and lending your authority to these people is how you like stray away from tokenism.
Definitely, thank you, everyone. And I think we have some really good points there. So that's all the questions that we had lined up, but we've gotten some questions in from panelists. Firstly, just to clarify, I think somebody asked around what Athena Swan is. We might not have explained. So just for anyone who doesn't know, the Athena Swan Award is something that institutions can earn, and it's mainly or has been so far based around gender equality, and it's kind of like a staff-based program to do with sort of leadership and that kind of equality, but hopefully in the next few years we might see it branch out into different kinds as opposed to just tackling the gender aspect. So I'm going to throw the next question out to our panelists, and we might just leave it for anyone who wants to come in on this one. So if anyone has any thoughts. So the first question that came up is, have you seen any examples of really great equality campaigns that you would like to emulate? So whether it's within Ireland or outside of Ireland. So does anyone want to jump in there?
I think I'll start with this. I know one of the campaigns that I'd planned on doing, now I know the USI does a really good trans awareness campaign. They did it in February. That was really cool. And I definitely shared those graphics with our LGBT society. But one campaign that I thought, and it was in our plans, obviously, before coronavirus, but we were working on a collaborative trans awareness day. So it was a one-day event. There were going to be like Tenny and Belong To and all different LGBT organizations. And it was a staff and student campaign. So it was a lecturer and myself came together and came up with the idea, and we both were passionate about the cause and stuff like that. So I think that was probably my best kind of campaign. I really wish that we had the day, but we're planning on maybe doing it next term. Now I won't be in, but luckily I've got the contacts still and stuff like that. So I'll pass it on to whoever's in my seat next year.
Yeah, that's great, Tanya. And I suppose it's important that if it happens down the line, even if you don't get to be the one to carry it over. And thanks for the mention on the trans campaign as well. We collaborated with Belong To actually on that one. Does anyone else want to come in on particular equality campaigns that they may have seen, that they would like to carry it themselves or would like to see repeated?
Sure. Oh, sorry. Go on. Who was that?
Leighton and someone else. I'm not sure who. Was it Rory?
I don't know. I will continue for now.
Go ahead.
Last semester, I had organised a panel called Show Me My Queer Future, and it was something that I thought was really interesting that mixed, I suppose, young queer people and older queer people. I feel like younger students and mature students are often very divided, so it was nice to have the different ages come together. So we had Colin McGorman, Sarah Phillips, Bululani Mafako, and Dil Berkmansinger. And it was lovely to have such a diverse panel, and it's something that I really would like to see done again in whatever context, whether to do with ethnic minorities or religion or ability or whatever. But I think having events where instead of it being angry all the time, which is really important, but it's also quite hopeful, and teaches you something, and it was good for like parents as well to see older people who are queer. And it was really nice. So I really hope that that's done again, hopefully in a larger capacity, maybe in different colleges.
Great, thanks. Sounds like an amazing lineup of a panel as well. Was someone else trying to come in there before Leighton?
Yeah, I did have one campaign that, well, I don't know if you'd describe it as a campaign, but something that the Maynooth Access Office are working on around mental health. And it's a program for graduates to kind of transition into the workplace. So in theory, that's what it's about. It's or essentially that's what it's about, is kind of helping graduates with mental health problems get settled into working life. But what it actually does is it's really influential among employers. So that's what I really like about it, is one of the kind of side effects of that initiative is that it's really teaching employers how to make their workplaces accessible, and really teaching them the value of that as well. So it's influential among employers and employer practices. So it's a really clever campaign. And then on the flip side, then for students with mental health problems as well, it's reassuring them that they can find work and be valuable in the workplace, because it's a huge anxiety as well, as will I be able to get a job? Will I be able to work? Will I find an understanding employer? So it's like an amazing campaign, because it affects both sides, awareness among employers and among students. So I really, really like it. I'd love to see other colleges do it as well, to actually help their graduates as well as their students.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute there. Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much. That sounds like a great campaign as well. Does anybody else want to come in there?
Yeah, so second semester, UCC carried out a project, and it was really simple, but I think the idea did have somewhat of an effect. So it was called Muslims of UCC, and I think if they did it for every minority group or just more minority groups, it would be nice. So they essentially just sent out an email. Any Muslim students could participate. You got a picture taken, and then they had prompt questions, and you also recorded a short video. And it was just simple questions, yourself and what your life in UCC is like, the challenges you face, questions like that. And then the piece would be attached to your portrait, and it was hung around the library in very visible places. So each person's portrait with their little piece underneath was just placed around the library, and in high visibility. So whether you meant to or not, you were reading about everyone, and you were learning about how these people experience UCC. And I participated in the project, but reading the other people's pieces, it was really eye-opening, because they have completely different experiences to me. So even though we're all under the same category as Muslims, like it would really show everyone who's not aware, or maybe not even interested, the differences and how different life is for different people. So I think if that could be done and applied to other groups, it would be effective as well.
Brilliant. It's really great to have opportunities like this as well to share campaigns. I hadn't heard of that one. It sounds amazing. Anyone else want to come in on the question around campaigns?
Yeah, sure. Just a really, really quick one that I think is really, really effective, and it gives people the tools to deal with really difficult scenarios, is just offering bystander training on basically just being able to effectively call out a lot of stuff and how to actually give people the tools to call stuff out. Because what I find is, I remember when I came in as welfare for the very first time, one of the biggest issues I was trying to deal with, because we also kind of have an insight into clubs and societies, is locker room talk. And it kind of ties back into toxic masculinity and stuff like that. A lot of people are actually afraid of calling like inappropriate talk out, or if, you know, someone's being rude, I'll use that word, that they have the opportunity and they actually have the skills to actually de-escalate a situation and just be like, that's not actually okay to say, but do it in such a way that, you know, they're comfortable doing it and stuff like that. So yeah, more bystander training will be awesome to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Bystander training is so important. I think it's where the future is going as well with a lot of things. So just in the interest of time, we are going to take one more question, but I'm being sneaky and kind of rolling two into one. So this came through on the chat, and the kind of two questions are, what are the plans for 2020/21 to promote equality on your campuses? And if you want to answer in addition to that, what would you like to see being done going forward? So we'll end on a positive enough note, and I'm going to go in an order again, and I'm going to start with Leighton.
Yeah, so I'm in a position where I don't know whether or not I'll be on campus next year. So it's kind of hard for me to say exact plans. What I would like to see, I suppose, is more of a communication between the SU in UCD and students. I think sometimes what happens is that people get carried away and they focus on one thing and other things are forgotten. So I think with equality in mind, it's important to try and get as many students in as possible and what they have to say and what they have to think and what their issues are. Because without students, we're not going to know where to go and we're not going to know what actions to take. And I think sometimes as well, people can take actions, but it's not what people want or it's not effective for whatever reason. So I think whilst I wouldn't have a concrete ideal right now as to what exactly I would want UCD as an institution or UCDSU to do, I think the main thing and a very basic thing which will make all the difference is the better communication and the more engagement with each other and understanding what different minority communities need and supporting them rather than leaving them to do the work.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like a sort of perfect summary of everything that's been said. Rory, would you like to hop in next?
Yeah. There was one campaign that was started last year by our Ethnic Diversity Centre at the time, which was an Ethnic Diversity Week, I think, and it was due to go ahead as well this year, and it'd be great for it to continue as an annual campaign. The one thing about it was that point of it was that one full-time student herself basically did all the running of it, even though it was as big really as any equality campaign. So probably going forward to make that part of the SU's annual campaigns, but that while it's led by a student, such as the Ethnic Diversity Senator, that they're not left doing all the work, that it is like the sabbatical officers maybe doing the work under their direction or something like that. But it would be great to see that continue. And then something that I am due to be working on before I finish up on the MSU executive is a disability policy as well, because I just really, my eyes were opened at the USI conference on disability that there was probably so much that we weren't doing in our own students' union, or a lack of awareness. So I'm working on getting stuff into a policy for our SU management to have as well, even in terms of making sure venues are accessible and really practical stuff. So that would be a great thing for there to be more like solid policies like that of how our own SU operates, and hopefully that will be mirrored by the university as well, that we can go and say to them, we have this, you really need to have it as well. So I think that could be good.
Yeah, thanks so much. Policies are so important as well because they last once they're there. Hannah, would you like to come in?
Yeah, so I think the main thing I'd like to see is more representation and more inclusivity on unions, for example, the students' union. I know there are a lot of students from ethnic minority backgrounds or who have disabilities who want to join, but they can't even run because they feel like there's no point, they're not going to get it. So I would like to see more inclusivity and diversity on the students' union in UCC. I would also, we have an LGBTQ plus week, and I'd like to see the same thing be done for other groups. So like a disability awareness week. I think we had it 1 year, but it wasn't continued. And one thing that stuck with me was not all disabilities are visible. So I think that should have been continued, and I would like to see that continued. Also a week for ethnic minorities, because there's people from everywhere. Like not everyone you see is an international student. They're Irish as well. Just yeah, events that raise awareness. I'd like to see more representation on the students' union and other unions in the university. Yeah, I think those are the two main things I would like to see in the coming academic year.
Sounds like some great initiatives there. Thanks a million, Hannah. Luke?
Yeah, I'd love to see more grassroots interaction, especially intersectional support among campaigns on a kind of a ground basis. I'd also like to see more work on the ground done for the likes of traveller access programs. I'd also love to see more groundwork done locally and kind of within the local community, particularly for mature students, parents, international students, and then students from a lower income household. Just because, as well as that, the students from a lower income household are a little bit more kind of closer to home, because 63% of our students are on a SUSI grant, which is it's crazy high number that is. I think the national average is 45%. And you know, our campus was set up to serve a disadvantaged area, and that was purely the only reason our campus exists. And I'd hate to see that lost in the university. The kind of the university coming to one. But what I definitely like to see is that kind of been maintained and having local culture respected and acknowledged and helped wherever it can be. Then kind of from a movement wise, I'd love to see more radical action. I'm looking at the officers across the country getting elected into student unions, and there is a lot of people getting elected who want radical change and aren't afraid to go after radical change. Look, I think we as minority groups already put up with so much on a regular basis. We're built a little bit tougher. And I'd like each and every one of us to support not only our own communities, but other communities as well, and show them a bit of love. Because post-COVID, our government won't be able to tell us no anymore. So I really want each and every one of us to bring out the inner activist and lobby like hell, because we're in a great position to push a lot of stuff over. A lot of lines once this thing goes away, and all the previous campaign work that people before us have done, we can definitely carry that over the line. So yeah, that's what I'd like to see.
100%. That was really inspirational. Thanks. And I think you're right. There's lots of opportunities coming out of this as well. There's the silver lining. And lastly, Tanya, would you like to come in here?
Yeah, so definitely I think what we need to continue to do is collaborate. So recognize that there are a lot of smart lecturers and a lot of smart staff in the institutes who are also really passionate about equality issues. And I know within my institute there are a number of lecturing staff members that are really passionate about different things that the union is passionate about. So I think creating those partnerships is the first thing that we really need to do. And then I think also in terms of like the student movement, I think again it's just getting people who are in the roles who are wanting to enact change, like who are wanting to go out and like do the work, but then also recognizing, like for myself as a student representative, I don't represent 9,000 students. So I have to include those students in my campaigns and get responses from them for ideas as to what I want to do and stuff like that, because it isn't my like union, it's not my movement, it's the students movement. So I think it's those things, it's collaborating, and it's also asking students what they want as well.
Yeah, great point that it's the student movement, it belongs to everybody. Thank you so much, Tanya. And that kind of wraps up the question session of this. So I just want to say thank you to all of the panelists for all of your such comprehensive answers. And I think we had some really lovely, robust discussion there. Yeah, just it was brilliant. And I might hand back over to Mary just if she wants to say anything and wrap it up.
Yeah, thanks so much, Megan, and to all of our panelists and participants. I really appreciate your time this evening. Some really great points made in the last hour. It's all been recorded, and we'll be making it available to student groups and student unions as a resource going forward. So just thank you so much for your input. We'll be sending on the recording to everybody who's taken part today as well, and I'll send on some useful follow-up links as well. And if you want to know more about what STAN does outside of these webinars, you can just check out stan.ie. Other than that, thanks a million, and stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Cheers. Thanks a million.
Thank you.